Maybe you're like me and you felt uncomfortable around other people for as long as you can remember. Maybe you've thought that's just the way you are, or that you were born that way and that you're destined to live like this forever. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you why that's just not the case, and that no matter who you are, there's something you can do about it. You are not born socially anxious. Hey there, I'm Neil and I struggled with social anxiety disorder for more than 2 decades. On this channel, every week, I will be bringing you the best methods and strategies that I have used in my own life to feel more confident. It is said that people are only born with 2 fears in life, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else we pick up along the way. If that's the case, then what might cause someone to develop social anxiety disorder? Well, one of the first things is genetic factors. Around 15% of infants have been shown to be born with a tendency towards shyness, and there have even been shown to be biological differences in the brains of shy people. There does exist, however, no such gene that is solely responsible for causing social anxiety disorder, or a particular set of genes that might lead to social anxiety. Just because something might be genetically influenced does not mean that it is genetically caused. There are some people that may have a tendency towards anxiety, but not specifically social anxiety. There was a psychologist called Jerome Kagan that did an experiment on hundreds of 4-month-old infants in an effort to determine which of them were more likely to be extroverted or introverted when they grew up. In order to do this, he introduced them to stimuli such as popping balloons, making other sorts of loud noises, and making changes to their environment to see how they reacted. Many of these infants would react by kicking and screaming, throwing their arms and legs around, and he found that once these infants reached adulthood, the ones that were the most highly reactive as babies were more likely to be introverted or quiet. Introversion and shyness are not the same thing, however, and although not all of these highly reactive infants turned out to be introverts once they were teenagers, around 25% of them did actually go on to develop social anxiety disorder. So it suggests that being highly reactive as a baby does make you perhaps more likely to develop social anxiety disorder later on down the line, although this is far from a certainty. My parents tell me that when I was a baby, I used to cry all the time, and that when I was an infant, I'd even go as far as to cling onto my mum's leg as she moved around the kitchen because I hated being separated from her. This might suggest that I was born with a tendency towards shyness. Maybe I had inherited one of these genes, but even though that could be the case, I still don't believe that I was born with social anxiety. I'm sure that it's something that's developed over the course of my life. I've actually got 3 sisters, and the one that's the most extroverted out of us, my parents tell me that she cried very little when she was a baby, so she clearly wasn't one of those highly reactive infants, and unsurprisingly she's turned out to be quite a big extrovert later on in life. The next thing that might contribute to somebody developing social anxiety disorder is the environment. So this could be external events, situations, circumstances in a person's life, and these might prompt the development of the disorder. And it's been suggested that the environment is a lot more important than the development of social anxiety than genetics. Research shows that perhaps the most important thing to do with the environment is social interactions with parents when you are a child, and it's even been believed that most children that develop shyness do so because of the interactions they have with their parents. The 3 main ways that a child might develop social anxiety disorder due to the interactions they have with their parents might be, first of all, having parents that are overprotective. So if you have overprotective parents, then these parents might shield you from going to certain social activities that perhaps other people in your peer group attend, and this could perhaps rob you of experiences in order to develop like other children, and it might lead the child to learn to avoid situations that are actually perfectly healthy for them. And the second way could be having authoritarian parents or abusive parents. So these parents might abuse their children, and it could just lead them to believe that they're not good enough in some way, which can lead to further damage down the line and for them to develop social anxiety disorder. And then the third and final way could be copied behaviour. So this might be if they have parents that are shy or who have social anxiety disorder themselves. So they may just try and emulate what their parents are doing and avoid and tell themselves that they too are shy and avoid people just because they see their parents doing that. In adults, highly critical work environments, bullying, or perhaps even some form of public humiliation can lead to shyness and then social anxiety disorder. Okay, so now we've established two of the most likely causes of social anxiety disorder. I'll go into a bit more detail around why you might be one of those people that's had it for as long as you can remember and why that's most likely not the case. So research suggests that a sense of self does not develop until we're about 18 months old, which suggests we're not born with shyness. Childhood amnesia is one of the main reasons that so many people might think that they've had social anxiety disorder for as long as they can remember. Most adult human beings can't remember anything before the age of about 2.5. Some might remember things from when they're about 2 years old, but that's less common, and usually this fragmented period of memory sort of ends around the age of around 4 to 5 years old. So most people can't really remember most things that happened to them before about the age of 4. It's not until a child is about 5 or 6 years old that they really develop memory recall ability that's on par with an adult human being. So it's entirely possible that a lot of these seeds that were planted that created social anxiety disorder were long before the child turned 5 or 6, which is why it may seem as though you've always had social anxiety disorder as long as you can remember. The main thing to understand is that we develop social anxiety disorder over time. Our brains do this through something known as cognitive structuring. If we're afraid of a certain event and that event triggers anxiety, then it's going to cause the neurons in our brain to fire together, and over time they will wire together. So if we keep doing this event over and over and over, then it's just going to keep on strengthening those connections in our brain, and we're going to learn to fear that event more and more and more. Some examples of positive things that you might learn to do when you're a child could be things like learning to tie your shoelaces, or learning to ride a bicycle for the first time, or even picking up a musical instrument and learning to play that. So your brain will gradually develop the neural pathways, and this practice will come more and more automatic the more you do it. And so the more high quality time you invest in learning to do these things, the better and better you're going to get at doing them. And unfortunately, with social anxiety disorder, this is more like an unwanted skill. So unlike learning to play an instrument or doing something positive, you're negatively reinforcing a behavior that you don't want in your life. At first, learning to do something like play a musical instrument might be really difficult if you haven't done it before, and it might take a lot of conscious effort in order to do it. But the more you do it, say if you practice for like 30 minutes a day, then with time, eventually, a lot of these things you found really difficult at the start might become more subconscious effort, and you don't really have to think about them. And a similar thing could really be said for social anxiety disorder. So perhaps when you were very little, you only occasionally felt triggered in certain social situations, but the more you did it as you got older and older, then perhaps the more frequently this happened, and even the intensity of the anxiety itself increased as the neural pathways in your brain became strengthened more and more. And your brains, they will take the path of least resistance because it's just built for survival, and it will just go with what's easiest because then it has more energy to devote to other things that it deems more important. So all these pathways, all these reactions, the anxiety that inevitably follows is just an unconscious reaction. It just happens very quickly without you even realizing it. For me, this certainly ran true in my own life. Shyness was something I struggled a lot with when I was a little kid and I was at primary school, but it was definitely something that really came into its own when I got to secondary school, which really runs in line with what most research suggests, that a lot of children really develop social anxiety disorder around the time they become a teenager. And that's definitely something that happened with me. That was certainly when it really peaked, and really throughout my teenage years was something that was very difficult to control, and it was certainly that mental monster that I know for so many people it can turn into. So now we know that we weren't born with social anxiety, and it's actually a learned skill, a very unwanted learned skill for that matter. We can begin to understand that we can actually start unlearning it, And the main method, the gold standard for this, is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. Every time you replace a negative irrational thought with a more positive rational one, then you are literally going to start rewiring the circuitry in your brain that has served you so poorly over your life. Your brain is malleable, it's actually wired to change, so it is entirely possible to begin to unravel the mess of social anxiety and to become more rational and feel less anxious over time. If you enjoyed this video and you want to watch more, then check out my next one where I'll talk about some of the fastest and the easiest ways you can get some relief from social anxiety. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.